after a dismal performance versus Arsenal, in a performance where we looked lost as a team, where we did not compete and where we did not create, a feeling of hopelessness is beginning to be felt in the fanbase. Potter has now faced 2 back-to-back defeats in the league, even though these are his first 2 defeats in the past 11 games. The question now is though, is Graham Potter potentially out of his depth? With this video today, I want to tackle some key conversation points surrounding Potter's time as our new manager. I want to discuss the difficulties Potter's facing. I want to talk about some of the mistakes I personally feel Potter's making. I want to talk about one of the key overarching issues that has faced multiple managers over multiple seasons, and that's been poor transfer strategy. And to move on, I want to talk where we go from here, as well as giving my conclusions. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Get involved in the comments and share your thoughts and opinions. To get straight into things, now we need to keep things objective, and to be objective we have to understand the difficulties that Graham Potter is currently facing. And I guess the main difficulty would be the fact that he's lost key injuries at the wrong time. When you're losing players like Reece James, probably the only player in the entirety of our squad that gets into any team across world football, that's not going to help you. Reece James is so important offensively and defensively too, and he's one of our best creative presences in the team as well. When you don't have the opportunity to work alongside N'Golo Kante, someone who essentially would be acting as that world-class version of Caicedo in your midfield, well, that's going to weaken your impact to win the midfield battle. That's going to weaken you when it comes to defending the transitions as well too. And on top of that, when your overall squad is slowly getting weaker, when you've lost players like Ben Chilwell and Fofana, well, that's not going to help your cause in terms of building an identity within this current set of players. But still though, if there's one thing that I really do like about Graham Potter, I like his honesty, and his ability to hold himself to accountability. I find that very refreshing. For me, I feel like Graham Potter currently finds himself in this damned if you do, damned if you don't type of dilemma, where if he tries something new to try to improve our attacking play, there's a big risk that things may backfire and he could potentially look silly. Whereas on the other hand, if he maintains the status quo of being very conservative and defending first, if we still don't get results, he'll be accused of not being braver or doing anything new. We can't forget that before these 2 defeats, we were on a 9-game unbeaten run. We picked up very impressive results twice against AC Milan, against Salzburg, and against Wolves as well too. And considering that he's only taken over the club within these past 2 months, and he's currently in this very congested period where there's now a World Cup on the horizon, well, for me, I feel like it's a very tall ask to expect from any manager. He's currently stuck in this crossroad where he has to improve the quality of the players and help them achieve their potential, while still needing to get results to get Champions League football, which means that he has to improve our ability to create an attack, which then means that we will be left a bit more open for counter-attacks, which isn't helpful to a lot of players who haven't necessarily prospered when games have become a bit more expansive. And for me, it's this weird balance of trying to be expansive and compact at the same time, which is creating quite a lot of confusion with the players in the team. And I guess that confusion will only be exacerbated when you've used about 5 to 6 different formations since you've joined in September. Let's look at someone like Raheem Sterling, for example. You know, since he signed for us, he's played on the left, on the right. He's played as a wing back on the left and the right, and he's played up front as well too. It's incredibly difficult to build consistency, to be able to get an understanding of players around you in the team, whilst improving your game at the same time. So what does Potter do now? Does he revert back to being more structured so he can grind out results? Well, how does that necessarily improve the players over the season? If we're being honest as a fan base, we've seen a bit of a decline in our team since the second half of last season. When you're inheriting a team in a mini downward spiral, well, it's not an easy fix that can happen overnight. But I think one thing that could help things a little bit is to find a bit of consistency in terms of sticking to one way of playing and making it a bit easier for the players to build greater understanding on the field. Now, Raheem Sterling is just one of many examples of players that have played many different roles in many different games. Now that we have a brief understanding of the difficulties and some of the issues that Potter's creating, I think one of the most prevailing issues that's kind of defined us recently over the past few seasons is the fact that we've had a pretty inconsistent time during these recent transfer windows. For me, ultimately, this is the main reason why we've plateaued. It's the reason why so many managers hit a peak they cannot improve upon, and it's due to inheriting squads that don't necessarily suit their tactical plans. Now personally, I like to look at what my rivals are doing. For me, our rivals are our main competition that actually stop us achieving our goals of getting league success. I could go into tons of details, but right now I'm going to focus on one area in which all our rivals are currently getting things right, and that is the transfer market. Now normally, when they enter windows, they're signing players to continue the momentum left from last season. These signings continue the build-up from last season, and for me, this has been our main fundamental issue season after season. Our signings do not build off any momentum whatsoever. We take 2 steps forward after a decent campaign, only to go 1 step back after poor transfer activity. In these recent seasons, we've still been able to get Champions League football, but for me, that's been due to the head start we've had. At the time, there was no Newcastle, there was no investment from them. There was an Arsenal team that was in the infancy of building for the long term. There was a Man United team that had no direction whatsoever, and a Spurs team that was struggling to find its Pochettino spark again. Fast forward to the current Premier League season. Our main competitors typically were Liverpool and Man City, but now they've been recently joined by Arsenal this season, a resurgent Newcastle, and a Man United team that has Ten Hag and a Conte-led Spurs. It seems like we're slowly losing that head start we once had, and when you compare our transfer activity to our rivals, well, their signings have been able to push them forward. They pushed them forward because they were signed for a specific footballing philosophy, or they were signed to improve an existing footballing philosophy. And I'm really stressing philosophy here. Since the transfer ban in that 1920 season, we've now had 3 different managers in 3 years, each manager supporting a personal brand of football they believe in. However, it's not a brand of football that complements towards the next manager. If you look at Frank Lampard's time here, he tried to build an expansive attacking 4-3-3 system. He was then thoroughly moved on, and then in comes Thomas Tuchel, who introduces a completely different way of playing. He brings in a short passing possession game based on automatisms and being defensively secure. His only major signings were Lukaku and Saul in his first major window, and in his second window where he had the license to sign the players that Tuchel wanted. You could argue the fact that most of his transfer activity was undermined based on the fact that he was replacing outgoing first team players, which denied Tuchel that possibility to improve and expand upon the football that he'd been coaching over the past year. Now, the signings that Tuchel once advocated for in your Aubameyangs, your Koulibalys, your Sterlings, your Cucureas, those purchases are now being questioned as well too, and this now leaves Graham Potter, who has this misamalgamation of a squad where he's still currently trying to find a proper core identity with the existing players he has at his disposal, and he's finding it very hard. Key players like N'Golo Kante and Reece James can help mask some of these issues, but when you're missing players of this caliber, it makes the situation even more difficult. It's simply this: the players that Lampard once signed, most of them didn't suit Tuchel, and the players that Tuchel has now signed, most of them aren't really suiting Graham Potter currently. So right now is definitely a good time to remind ourselves why Graham Potter was specifically signed to act as that replacement for Thomas Tuchel. We have to remember that he was signed on a 5-year deal. He cost us around 20 million to sign him and his team as well too. And you're not coughing up that money easily if he doesn't have a long-term vision that you believe in and feel like he can achieve with the right criteria. It's fair to remember that he is inheriting a squad that was never made in his image. It's a squad that has not had a clear, defined philosophy of play for a very long time. And it was a team that was currently underperforming as well too. Now for me, it's fair to look at Potter's time whilst he was the Brighton manager. It took 2 seasons to achieve Brighton's task of making them a top 10 team. He had 2 seasons where they were incredibly slow in what they were doing. It took 2 seasons to slowly phase out players in the squads, to deal with the impact of losing key players as well too. From the 1920 season to the end of the 2021 season, Brighton barely shifted in terms of league place. However, once it came to the 21-22 season, you could see the fruits of his labour finally blossoming. They secured a 9th place league position last season, picking up 12 wins, 15 draws and 11 defeats. Since then, they've improved upon things during the start of this season, and they currently find themselves 6th in the table, level on points with us. Now, I'm not here to argue the fact that Potter's going to need at least 2 seasons, of course, to make things happen here. But one advantage he definitely does have with us, which he did not have at Brighton, is that we have more money to spend on good players, and we have a better caliber of player in the squad too. What he needs is time to build his philosophy and time to reshape the squad in his image. Potter was signed to take over a new Chelsea that is still currently under construction. We're seeing changes with our staff, our scouting networks, the overall vision and philosophy we want to have here. And Potter was specifically signed based on his credentials to operate in these structures, and that's exactly what he showed at Brighton. Now, after our draw today versus Borussia Dortmund in the Champions League, here's what David Bernard, our Director of Footballing Operations, had to say before that encounter.
So you think in 3 months' time, a lot of time, Chelsea is up on the top level, or do you still have problems in the moment?
Well, there's an English expression, there's a lot of water to flow under the bridge yet between now and February. You know, we've got the World Cup, you've got the transfer window. So I would say that when we do meet each other in February, it probably may well be two different teams that if we were to play tomorrow, for example.
Let's not forget that players will be bought in January. So now it's down to the club to make the right changes to phase the team in Potter's image. So right now, I want to give my conclusion. And for me, there is a very simple reality that has to be accepted now. We once spoke about Liverpool's rise from CL hopefuls to CL regulars and league contenders. We're now seeing the benefits of what Arteta's doing after having more than 1,000 days at the club. And the reality simply is, we need to keep some faith, have patience, and build for the future. We can't constantly compare on short-term results. Now, since the transfer ban, we've got short-term successes that have amounted to long-term struggles. As we're seeing with football today, you cannot simply buy your way out when a philosophy is not defined. That strategy is too reliant on quality being available in the market, and if you even have the possibility to sign those players to begin with, it just isn't sustainable and it doesn't work. What does work though is implementing a culture and philosophy and diligently sticking to that. There's no other way. You can be a great manager like Tuchel, but even being tactically strong isn't good enough. We've seen two completely different styles of football introduced, with a third coming now from Graham Potter. We can't forget all these players were brought to play under different regimes. Without a pre-season, with injuries to key players and fitness amidst the balance, there are too many issues at once to achieve on a weekly basis. Now these are the headaches that Potter has taken over, but I think the board understand this too, and that's why they're willing to invest in January. I'm just hoping that they invest wisely and phase out the players that need to go, so we can play a style everyone can fall into. As I've always said, the best clubs have unity from the top to the bottom, and this is what we're currently trying to build. And this is exactly why Graham Potter was hired. So now isn't the time to take these short-term results as signifiers that Graham Potter isn't good enough. Now these struggles that Graham Potter currently has, they're not immune to world-class managers. We've seen Klopp struggle. We've seen Guardiola even struggle during his first season at Man City. It's typical when you're trying to restructure a club in its entirety. So for me, we shouldn't take the short-term results as signifiers that Potter is not the right guy for the job. We'll probably have more results like Arsenal, and I think as a fan base, it's probably time to accept the fact that if you want to be that team that can compete with your Real Madrids, your Bayern Munichs, your Man Cities, that's not going to come overnight. That's only going to come with consistent, diligent work to lead towards those goals. So you guys, on that note, I felt like I had to make this video on Potter because he is facing a lot of pressure. I know that I have been critical about his games that we've seen recently, and of course I have to be because I need to give my instant impression on these games. But that doesn't mean that I don't understand what the long-term play and goal is. And personally, I do feel like based on Potter's credentials and what he's done and the type of man and tactician he is, I think eventually he'll come goods, and I think it's time to get behind him and have some faith and patience. So you guys, on that note, share your thoughts and opinions below. I'm Nini FC, this is Blue Lions TV. I'll catch you guys later with some more videos. Cool.